This is Pete Fletzer. On this episode of Around the Galaxy, we're talking to the author of the Star Wars Archives, Paul Duncan.
Star Wars has become so big, so enormous. It's not just a film, for instance, animation, TV shows, comics, books.
You're listening to Around the Galaxy.
Welcome to episode number 143 of Around the Galaxy, the Star Wars Fan Talk Show. I am your host, Pete Fletzer. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey, if this is your first visit, welcome aboard. Hope you enjoy the ride. And hey, before you forget, make sure to hit that subscribe button because we deliver Around the Galaxy every Tuesday where we have an opportunity to get to know some of the people behind the Star Wars fandom. And on Saturdays, we deliver something called Disturbances in the Force. Every Saturday morning, you give us 5 minutes, we'll give you the galaxy. We bring you all the big news from the Star Wars universe from the previous week. No spin, no clickbait, just the facts, and you can find that in your podcast stream. We also put that up on our Twitter feed as well, so you can check that out. Well, this week, we are privileged to be speaking to Mr. Paul Duncan. Paul Duncan is the author of over 150 books, but if you're a Star Wars fan, you probably know him from the epic tomes, the Star Wars Archives. He did one for both the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. The prequel trilogy one is relatively new. He's also done things for horror history. He's done Charlie Chaplin. He's done just recently a fantastic James Bond collection. But he has brought us so many interesting and unique perspectives on the creation of our favorite universe, the Star Wars universe, and he shared some of those stories with us on this episode. I do need to point out there was a bit of an issue with the recording quality, so you're going to hear a little bit of more hiss than we would like, but the stories are worth pushing your way through on that. So, but before we get started, I'm excited to bring you our next review. Every week we
you're
bring.
Excited? You're excited to hear from me?
Yes.
Your resident battle
What did
droid?
you just tell me?
I am ATG3, and I am the official review reader for Around the Galaxy. And, it seems like with all the technology that went into building me, spending my time surfing the internet, looking for reviews of your show seems a bit, less than taking full advantage of what I can do.
Okay, so we can maybe...
No, that's totally
fine.
Fine.
Whatever.
No, you need me to do it, and
I don't
I'm
need
here
you to do it.
For you,
I mean,
because,
I could
I'm
read
a
them.
droid,
I could read them myself.
Apparently, that's what I'm going to do.
Don't make me feel bad.
No, don't feel bad. That's what I'm programmed for. By the way, do you know what I used to be programmed for?
What?
Yeah, I used to be programmed to fight in the Clone Wars and blow stuff up and shoot people.
Yeah,
but this is probably better for everybody involved. I'm very happy to be what am I doing? Reading podcast reviews. It's a bit of a career change for me. But I'm really happy to do it.
Well, if you aren't happy, we can...
I'm serious.
No.
I'm really enjoying this.
Okay.
This podcast
I'm not
review
buying
comes to
it
us
at all.
from Apple Podcasts from somebody named Smiller80.
Maybe that's S. Miller 80?
Okay, maybe it's S. Miller 80. I
Right,
don't know.
yeah.
This is what they wrote. My job is to read them, right?
So then read it.
Okay,
Let's
Smiller
go.
says, a must-listen each week. I love to talk about Star Wars, and when I can't, I love to listen to people who love Star Wars as much as I do talk about Star Wars. This podcast gives me a great way to do this each week. Oh man, this guy needs to get out more.
Okay, see, that's not very nice. I mean,
sometimes it gives me new insight. Sometimes it helps me appreciate things I hadn't appreciated before, and sometimes, well, it's just fun.
Okay, well, that's good.
He goes on after rambling for a bit to say,
would you be nice?
It's so much fun, very well done, and has a nice variety of guests. All right, well, here's one of our guests, Mr. Paul Duncan, after these messages.
This is Paul Duncan, and you're listening to Around the Galaxy.
Paul, how are you?
Great. How are you? Great to be here.
It's great to have you here. I appreciate you taking some time. I know you've been very, very active of late. You most recently had the Star Wars Archives come out for the prequels, which of course also run into the re-releases. And I think you first hit everybody's radar with the first Star Wars Archives book, which came out. What was that? 2 years ago? Was it 2.5?
Yeah, 2.5, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
You lose track of time. But when you do these things, you just got your head down and you just work, and then it comes out. Oh, I can stop now. Let's move on. Yeah,
we made it to this one, and now it's time for the next one, right? So, so maybe for people who don't know you, maybe just give us a short little bit of your background.
Oh gosh, well, I'll sound just like one of those people just reeling off things
Go
that
for
I've
it.
done. I did a CV recently. First time I've done a CV for more than 20 years, right? And I've done something like 150 books. It's just crazy. So I'm mainly known for all the film stuff. Ingmar Bergman, Pedro Almodovar, James Bond, Star Wars, Charlie Chaplin, doing these enormous books on directors, on everything. But I love comics, so I've got lots of books on those that I used to interview a lot, and also mystery, crime fiction, noir fiction. I love all that. So I try to do everything I can all at the same time, and at some point a book comes out. That's basically me.
You collect the information, and one day there's a book ready to happen. That's great.
Exactly. I mean, I must have like 10, 15 books at the moment that I'm working on, and at some point one will be ready, so it'll come out. And in fact, talking to artists and painters and things like that, that's often the case, that they'll have multiple things on the go.
Right.
And they'll wait for the moment when, oh yeah, that one's finished now, and then they'll release it.
I mean, and it must be. I can imagine that that's kind of the way it is, because I think if you look at the Star Wars Archives, both volumes, you probably could have gone further and forever on those with all the information that you get to gather as you're putting these together.
Absolutely. In fact, there was only going to be one book, with 1 to 6, and I was like 4 or 5 months into researching, and I said to the publisher, Benedict Taschen, this needs to be 2 books, and I said to Lucasfilm, this needs to be 2 books. I mean, if I could have had 6 books,
sure,
I would have been happier, but I didn't think I could stretch that far. But yeah, one of the problems of going into archives is that you find so much incredible material. I mean, in terms of artwork, but also in terms of development and stories and oral histories, and naturally, you find all the interesting bits and put them together in order to make a book.
Right.
But you want something that's much bigger and more inclusive and more detailed. But unfortunately, space is limited, and so you have to crunch it all down into a tiny 600-page book, which is yay big.
Which weighs more than my son when he was born. It's like a 13-pound book, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. You need the force to lift it.
And they are, as I was saying before, they are, to call them books is almost a misnomer. I mean, they're beautiful pieces of art on top of everything else. There's the way the package is put together is absolutely brilliant, and it's it's a premium price, but it's worth it in every way. I guess maybe my first question for you is, were you a Star Wars fan before you got into your writing, or you got into what you do today?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I remember it was a bank holiday in the UK, 1977. I was eating a sandwich. I was on my own. I remember it in the house. I would have been 13. So school holiday in the house, lunchtime. I was eating a sandwich, probably not to be too pedantic about this, but probably it was either a chip sandwich, which would have been fries, and in American speak, and or it would have been brown sauce, sandwich. But that's perhaps too much information. But I was watching television, and there was this report about this movie that was coming out, and I saw these spaceships flying about, and I thought, wow, what's this? And there were pictures of all these people lining up in America to see this movie. And I thought, I have to know more about this movie. I have to see this movie. So this is 1977. So it would have been, I suppose, August, September, October, around that time. And it didn't come out in the UK until the end of 1977. And it didn't come to my part of the world, because it was in the Midlands, until January 1978.
Wow.
On January 1978, the very first showing near my town, on a Sunday afternoon, I went to see the very first showing of Star Wars. So yeah, I knew a bit about Star Wars, and I found everything that was in print on Star Wars, because I wanted to know everything. And then when I was 15, I started my own magazine, all about science fiction, comics, TV, everything to do with it. And of course, I included Star Wars.
Sure.
So yeah, I knew about Star Wars from way back, from the beginning. Yeah.
And it's interesting too, because there was something about Star Wars, because I was about 7 or 8 years old when I first saw it, because it came out in 1977, but I saw it, I was 7 years old. There's something about Star Wars that makes you want to engage with it, whether it was collecting every magazine article I could find about it, etc. And so what do you think it is about Star Wars? It is probably the most documented film from a behind the scenes perspective, right? I'm just talking about A New Hope, and actually, as you move forward, documenting filmmaking became sort of the norm, right? That's one of those sort of things that, Star Wars broke so much ground, but that's one of those things, right? It became, hey, we need to keep track of everything that's going on. So how did you go about creating this archives book, with knowing that there were, there were the great Phil Stosak books, there was, just pieces all over the place.
All the J.R. Rinsler books.
And the J.W. Rinsler books, right? Sure.
Yeah, I mean, those are J.W., yes. I mean, I was quite frankly very worried, apprehensive about doing this, because everybody has trod that ground before and done brilliant work. I mean, even when the films came out originally, they were always making up books.
Sure.
I remember there was Alan Arnold from Empire Strikes Back, and I picked up all of these things. I read them all. I picked up Starlog and Starburst, and all these magazines, and Fantastic, and everything. I mean, these were very difficult to find in the UK. I'm based in the UK. I was on holiday, going somewhere I don't normally go. I went into a shop, and there was a copy of Starlog with Star Wars on the front cover, and I thought, well, I have to have that. I have to borrow money from my parents.
Yep.
And in order to have that, and it was. It was very much that sort of thing. And as you're right, it was incredibly well documented. People suddenly began to become interested in how these things were done.
Right.
Now, for me, there was a book by John Borman, which was about the making of the Emerald Forest, his movie. And it was his sort of documentary, sort of diary of the making of that movie, that I thought was fascinating. And for the first time, I sort of understood that the idea that making a movie was fraught with uncertainty.
Mm.
You never knew all these movies that we admire and we love and we think are great. You never know when they're making them.
Right.
People never know how it's going to turn out. They never know, if this shot is going to make it, or if it's going to be any good. And so there's a sort of tension in reading this book by John Borman, and that's always, sort of stayed with me. And then, so when it came to doing books on movies, many years later, for TASCHEN, all of these, I've always felt that. I always felt, well, the stories that I want to tell in the books should have a sense of that drama and that uncertainty. And how can I do it? How can I convey this? And so this sort of came in to doing these books on Star Wars. And it was only after, because I thought, well, how do I add drama to this? Because everybody knows how they come out. They become incredibly successful, make lots of money, blah blah blah.
Right.
And so I thought, well, the person I want to hear from most of all, the voice that I want to listen to was George Lucas. And so, after 6 months, a year of doing research at the ranch and at the Presidio, I thought, well, this is what I have to try and get. And luckily enough, I asked George if he would consent to do an interview. And he said yes, which was great. And that was it. And I think the important thing is that I wanted to feel as though I was with him as he was making the movies, as he was thinking them up.
It's remarkable.
And then bring in the other voices in
right.
relationship to him. So only the voices of the people who are actually there are the voices in the books.
That's great. It's remarkable to me that you didn't know if you were going to have an interview with George Lucas before you started this. That feels like sort of step number one. That's amazing.
Well, I mean, you never know when you do these books what they're going to be. I mean, you can't go in and say, well, I'm going to make a book about this, and it's going to be this, this, and this. What you do is you go in and you say, well, what's there, right? What's the materials, that are available, and what comes at me. I mean, after there were lots of factoids and little anecdotes and bits and pieces, and one of the things that struck me very much about Star Wars is that Star Wars has become so big. It's so enormous. It's not just the films, or it's the animation, TV shows, comics, books, video games, etc. And there's this enormous amount of information out there being created for Star Wars. But why is it successful? What does it mean? And I thought that the only person who could tell me that was George. And this is why talking to, as I'm going and, going through all this materials, these are sort of ideas and, things that come into my head. And I'm thinking, well, really, I want to get back to why it was successful in the first place. What was that secret factor, that magic formula? What was the thing that drove George that he put into it, those secret ingredients that come out in the movie and generate and propagate everything else?
This is Stephen Kent, and you're listening to Around the Galaxy.
And I guess we're kind of lucky that there has been that they kept so many of those things, because you were able to go into the archives and find remarkable photos and items that weren't seen before. What was it like as a put on your fan hat as that 13-year-old kid who was who was looking for anything Star Wars he could find, to walk in to the archives. I mean, you got a key to the castle that so many people who listen to the show would give an arm to do.
Well, I mean, it is overwhelming. I mean, the first day, I literally, I don't know how to describe it, but the first day, I was like, have you? I mean, basically, I went into the big archive in the ranch. We've got all the props and whatever. Basically, I ran through that. It was almost as if, there's a scene in a Godard film, I think, where the people, it's probably Jules Jim or something like that, where they dress up and they run through the past the Mona Lisa and the Louvre, everything the Louvre in like 5 minutes.
Right.
Well, that was me going through the archive. It's just like whoosh, 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 up every row, every just opening drawers, closing. What's in there? It was just crazy. And it was then I had to sort of calm down and then just methodically realized I had to go through. I had to take a photo. I mean, I had to take snaps of everything, right? Not everything, but things that I thought were interesting, because I have to be able to find everything that I need in order to include in the book. So I thought, how do I do this? So, okay, this cabinet, this drawer number, snap. Open the drawer, snap. Okay, this folder, snap. The name of the folder.
Right.
Open it. Oh, wow, this is great. Oh, yeah, Joe Johnston. Snap.
Right.
Ralph McQuarrie. Oh, snap. And it was like, and it was literally, it was like that. And then you go, what's this? Never seen this before. And you go, what on earth is this? It was like you would go like, and like in your brain you file it and you think, what on earth was that for? And it sort of goes on in the back of your head, and then you carry on, and then like 3 months later, you sort of in your head you go, oh, that connects to something I saw on the first day, or etc. And then you start building up a picture, and there's like this mosaic of information, because not everything is stored chronologically, and so you have to piece together what the story is. I mean, I remember I met Doug Chang, for example, and one of the things that I did before I met him is I got all of these drawings that he'd done, and luckily they were numbered and dated, so I could go through them and I could actually ask him, oh look, it goes from this to this to this to this. Can you tell me why? Right. Yeah. And what happened? Because then, and he was saying, oh, these were all rubbish. But then George picked out this from this drawing, this from this drawing, this from this drawing, and told me to put them together. And I did. Wow. Yeah. And these were the Baron drawings, which became the Baron drawings. Right. So different aspects of different drawings, combined. And so he could tell me which drawings he took bits from in order so that he made that later drawing like 6 months later or a year later. Right. So this is how it's done. This is, if you like, a more forensic approach. I mean, I take the approach of the historian, in that I say this was done on a particular date, and then this was done on that date, and I piece it together that way, so that I don't make any value judgments in the books. These are not opinion pieces.
Right.
I never say anything other than assume that's a fact. And then in that way, I can assemble it, and all the people who are actually there can give me their opinions and their stories.
How long does it take to take something like that? You've built. I mean, it's sort of like, in a way, it's like doing a written documentary, right? You go in, as if you're doing a documentary film, you have an idea what you're going to get from it, but you don't know until you start getting in there. How long is the process between that sort of initial kickoff to when you finally have that book that you've said, hey, we're close enough, this is done, as we were saying at the beginning?
It's normally about a year of joy and a year of terror. I mean, because the researching is the easiest thing in the world, because you're there and you're just going, wow, I love that. Oh gosh, that's brilliant. And it's collecting information, right? But there's a point at which you have to process it, which means that you have to start making decisions as to what to include and what to take out. And that's difficult. But it's the job,
right?
It's not, and that's and then it's a matter of finding what the arc of the story is. So, because it's not just about the dates. It's also about, for example, if George was talking about. Because when I was talking to George, it was mainly about a subject or an idea. It was nothing about when did you do this or when did you do that, because I could find out all of that in the documentation. So it was all about the why with George, and so it was trying to find a way of including that within the text and to place it in the most appropriate place. And so that was the real writing of it. As you say, it's exactly the same as doing a documentary. And for some reason, I can't understand why somebody hasn't approached me to make one, because basically it's ready-made.
I think we need a Disney Plus series with Paul Duncan and the story of Star Wars. I think that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be there in a heartbeat. Yeah.
We'll push for it on social media. You make an interesting point about the fact that making a film is almost as much of an adventure as the film itself, the finished product. And I know you're active on social media, and that you share a lot of sort of important dates and a lot of interesting things there. As a Star Wars fan, I imagine you're still a fan of things that are coming down the pike. We see a lot of fan reaction to things like directors changing and writers changing and dates shifting. Would you say that is the norm? It's just that it's more exposed in a franchise like Star Wars, or what would your position be on some of the things we're seeing?
Well, I think that I think there's a basic misunderstanding of what the creative process is. When you make something, you don't always know, as I said, what it's going to be at the end of it.
Right.
There's a lot of uncertainty, and so decisions have to be made along the way that can change the direction of that project. So, in terms of, it's a very broad question you're asking there, but I think that what I've tried to do in the books is to show that each decision is not made lightly, and it's always made for a reason. There's one point I remember I was very insistent with George about why did you take out all that Padme stuff in Attack the Clones and in Revenge of the Sith? It's all great stuff. And it's sort of like, and George came back with like different answers. But ultimately the final answer, and the answer which sometimes you push a little in order to get the answer that you were waiting for, the real answer. Just there are things which are self-evident, if you like, but sometimes you need the obvious answer to be said.
Hmm.
It's quite simply the film was too long.
Right.
You know, that he knows that if he includes these scenes, which are great, right, then it's going to add 20 minutes, 30 minutes to a 2.5 hour movie.
Right.
You know, and that's just not feasible.
Right.
You know, and George knows this. Already he knows he's going too long. And if it was a TV series, if it was a different format,
right,
then that would make sense. It would have the space and the air to breathe in order to let those scenes go in.
Right.
But it makes absolutely perfect sense. And as George says, well, we already know that Padme is lovely. You
right.
know, that she's selfless. Yeah, that she's given up a lot, right, in order to be who she is and to do what she does. So you don't need half an hour, you know, to ram home the point. Yeah.
Right.
You already know it, right?
Yep.
So you don't need to see it. And so I completely understand in terms of the creative process that there will be reasons for it.
Right.
Reasons that from the outside, you know, you may not understand. And I think the other aspect of it is that people are very ravenous for information and additional things, which I'm trying to supply in the book. Obviously. But there's a reason why it's not there. You know,
right.
There's a reason why the cut is as it is, and there's a reason why, you know, this design was used and this design was not used.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I'm trying to explicate that within the books, but also it's just a normal part of the process. I mean, I've done books on Charlie Chaplin, Pedro Almodovar, Michael Mann, Jean Renoir, many Ingmar Bergman, many books on many different creators, and it's always the same. Yeah. So, so this is just no different.
Yeah, the book reads really well. You know, there's some great stories there. My favorite story is actually from the first book with the I love the way you captured the whole "I love you, I know" part. That just, you know, you feel like you're there on the set. Is there any particular favorite story that you were able to uncover through either one of the archives that stuck with you?
Well, I think a lot of the stories are, for me, the thing that's always interesting is the way that George harvests. I can't say the word.
Harvested.
Yeah. Different ideas from everybody. That he was completely open to ideas from everybody, and that you can see it in some of the. Unfortunately, I couldn't reproduce the complete transcripts of these sort of story conferences that he did, but they're absolutely fascinating because you see that people are giving him ideas or different points of view, and then he's pushing back on it to say, no, that doesn't work because, right? Or he's accepting it and then trying to incorporate it into the story or into the plot, or if not directly into a plot in that part, perhaps it will work somewhere else.
Right.
So this sort of shuffling and reshuffling of ideas and talking it through, I think that was the most fascinating part of, if you like, the research.
Right.
Because you really got a sense of how detailed everybody got about it. But also that other people didn't really. George's understanding was much deeper than people give him credit for. That in his mind that he had certain ideas about the mythical archetypes, the psychology of the characters that perhaps other people were missing, and he was trying to keep on and keep hold of, and to keep central to the characters. So, so for me, that was the most interesting part of it, and I've tried to keep in the story conferences that I've reproduced. I've tried to keep those aspects as part of it.
It's really interesting to hear that, because that's clearly, one of the things that George does have a vision, and I think that's what makes him such a visionary in the true sense of the word visionary. Is he's going to stick to that. I can only imagine what it would have been like to be in those early conversations that he was having with all these people who all became legends, and they were all just sort of sitting around drinking coffee, talking about these story ideas, and just the feedback that he got and what influenced him and what didn't. Must have been.
Yeah, I mean, but everybody looks out for it. It's funny, even on Star Wars, when they were doing the VFX, it was called special effects at the time.
Right.
Now called VFX. I remember that they were looking for text, and I remember there was a conversation somebody had that, they'd seen the New Yorker or Vanity Fair or something like that, probably the New Yorker, had an extract on Bruno Bettelheim's new book on how children read mythology, right? And George saying, I need to have a copy of that, and this is before the book came out. So this is, these ideas are going on all the time. But it's not, when people say Joseph Campbell, they're not. It's not just a name check.
Right.
This is a serious thing. If you have a look on a documentary about when he was starting on episode 1, you'll see the row of books in the background. And they pan across. You've got Julius Caesar on the Civil Wars, the Gallic Wars.
Right.
You've got books on psychology. Yeah, you've got books on myths and folklore.
Yeah.
As well as the lay bracket and science fiction, science fantasy, etc. So, this is all really serious stuff. And I remember Ryan Church telling me he remembers going into that room and being surrounded by all of these books, and admiring them, and knowing that George had read and absorbed them, because when Ryan would sit down and talk about certain things about design, etc., George would come back with design ideas, that that showed that he knew about design and the history of design, and so this is George walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Right. Yeah.
And I wanted to bring that back into the arena of talking about Star Wars and George.
Hey everybody, this is Jermaine Lucia from IO9, and you're listening to Around the Galaxy.
What might have been the most surprising thing that you learned doing these books?
I think that it was the idea of non-linear filmmaking. I haven't really grasped what that is now. And in fact, what the idea of non-linear editing is. Everybody does now.
Right.
Which is essentially you can have everything that you film all up at the same time, and you can pick and choose anything you want and edit any part of it at any time that you want. That's essentially non-linear editing. And which George was instrumental in helping move forward.
Right. The Editoroid concept and things like that.
Exactly,
yeah.
and Ben Burt, etc., doing all that. But that idea applied to filmmaking as a whole. The idea that you can film and edit and incorporate any aspect of any part of the movie at any time. And that's really what he brought to filmmaking. Now, I hadn't really grasped the significance of that. And yeah, it was the idea of me taking a piece of paper, writing on it, right, and then cutting out and rewriting, cut and pasting any aspect of the story that I was writing. And he's doing that with cinema, right? Now that is because normally what everybody, and I think this is a preconception that people have about cinema in general, that you have an idea, you write a script, you film it, you edit it, you project it. Yeah, right. That is not cinema anymore.
Not anymore, no, for sure.
Not anymore. And so people think that's a bad thing for George to change his mind after the edit. No, that's the good thing, because anybody who's ever created anything knows that after you've spent 2 years creating something, you have a much better idea of what you want to create after those 2 years than you did at the very beginning.
Right.
So you should be writing it at the end, not at the beginning.
And to be able to go back and do it is a gift in a way, right? I think
absolutely.
Yeah.
And what George did, he basically created this new way of working, right? Which a lot of people within the industry can now work it in the same way. And that was the most surprising thing, I think. And also, just when they were doing the special editions for 97, in 94, 95, they were discovering just how terrible the original Meg was.
Yes.
From the original 77 film, and basically it would have been lost unless they'd redone it. I mean, that was, I thought, no, that can't be true, but it is. That was very surprising as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that, and maybe because as we started the conversation talking about the fact that this is 44 years old and it's a successful multimedia franchise. It's a very sort of ownable story, and ownable. I use that word on purpose because I think what happens is people become such big fans that when you change something, it feels like you've changed a piece of their religion or something like that. And it's it's funny, there's this constant conversation about what's canon in Star Wars, and at the end of the day, to your point, George built tools so that he could make sure that the story he wanted to tell gets told the way he wants to tell it. And I think it's an important point that you make, that he always had a vision for, or at least maybe not the specifics, but a vision for what the types of characters were, which means that the way they end up on screen could end up being mutated, at least over time, to make sure that he gets it to where he wants. I think Han Solo shooting first is an interesting concept, right? Because of the fact that, we all took that to mean, well, Han Solo is this type of character that's, not willing, not afraid to shoot first, ask questions later. But George, I guess, never saw him that way.
No, it's almost like it's not I misspoke, but, but you misheard me.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. And I think it all comes down to the editing, the very precise editing, and what he had available at the time.
Right.
So if you look at shows like Have Gun Will Travel, which I only discovered after talking to George, there is a very specific moral center, moral message to these movies and the TV series, and this is where George comes from. George doesn't come, even though he may reference The Good, Bad, and the Ugly and The Man with No Name, all these things from from the late 60s. in reality, he was formed by the 50s.
Hmm.
You know, he was formed by Flash Gordon and by Dan Barry as a newspaper script. He was formed by the Western shows of the 50s, which have a very, very moral center to them.
Mm.
And I think that, and this is, I think, where, you know, when George said to me, you know, I was, you know, it really upset me that humans are killed, are shot in Star Wars. I thought, well, what do you mean? He said, no, we never shoot human beings. You know, it's always aliens or other things, because otherwise it's too frightening for the children. You know, and it gives the wrong message. And I thought, hold on a minute, this is a sort of gentleness,
right?
You know, and a concern for what people may see, and also the idea that really you've got to remember these really are films for 12-year-olds. In George's mind, they are still films for 12-year-olds. And so even though the fans have grown up, you know, through generations, etc., we should really see them as Walt Disney films from the 50s and 60s. You know, Jungle Book and all of these, Fantasia. They're that sort of precious, protective, moral movies. You know, that are, as George says, they're telling you the rules for life. They're telling you all of these characters have these little things about them that tell you, you know, I am selfish, and therefore I've got to learn to a certain extent to be selfless. You know, I am selfless. I'm too selfless, says Leah. You know, essentially, and I've got to learn to look after myself,
right?
And to give and to have something for myself. Yeah. So those are the Han and Leah characters,
right?
Yeah. And Luke is a child who's growing up. He's got to learn about all the bad things in life. He's got to learn about death, you know, of about the world, about the balance of the world, and he has to have people to teach him to do that. And he's, you know, and it's like in real life, you know, you can have your parents and your mentors to teach you the right way to go, the right road or route to take, you know, but of course you ignore them, yeah, you know, and you learn to make your own mistakes,
right?
You know, that's why Luke goes off to save his friends, you know, best friend, you know, because he has to learn to make his own mistakes,
right,
and hopefully survive and learn from it,
right,
and in order to grow, so that, you know, at the end of Return of the Jedi, he's in a position, he's grown to such an extent that he understands that he's been tempted, he's growing angry, he's using the dark side,
right,
in order to fight his father, to strike his father, and he realizes, no, that's not the way. You can't fight against something which is evil. You've got to fight for something which is good, you know, and you know, and these are the lessons that the characters, in the background of the psychology of the characters, those are the lessons they're learning, and I think George is presenting it in a very easy way for 12-year-olds to understand.
Right. Well, and I think that's why it survives, right? I think, you know, one of the I've talked about this before. When I was writing for Star Wars Galaxy magazine, I had an opportunity to speak at a very small local science fiction convention. And I started my presentation because there weren't Star Wars conventions yet, but I started my presentation, my discussion with Star Wars isn't science fiction. And literally, there were people literally in the back going, forget it. I'm not interested in this. But, and it's because it doesn't matter if it's dragons and princesses or Star Destroyers or Conan the Barbarian. It's like, this story is told. And what's happened with Star Wars, in fact, I was speaking with Ian Convery, who's Dave Filoni's wife, about this on last week's show. We talked about how Star Wars has become essentially its own genre, but it's always been every genre, and it can tell that simple child story whether it's a Western through The Mandalorian or through, epic, galactic battles. So
Yeah, but it's always. I mean, the best movies as Star Wars, as are called Star Wars message movies, or TV series, or
yeah,
whatever. The ones that move you most are normally the ones that hark back to what George was setting up in terms of the psychology of the character.
right.
And I mean, you can do any genre. You can do heist movies and suspense movies and horror movies. You can do musicals. You can do anything you want.
Right.
Within the context of this universe.
Right.
And but ultimately, if they hark back to that original, those original ideas that George had, then normally they're more moving as pieces.
That's great. That's excellent. And now as we said earlier, you've done the Godfather Family Album, you've done Charlie Chaplin, you've done horror and film noir studies, you've got the very recent James Bond book. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh gosh, this is another one where I spent a couple of years, in fact, researching and then putting together. And it's like the Star Wars Archives. It's a oral history, illustrated with lots of behind the scenes, never before seen images and documents that tell the story of how the Bond movies were made, including the latest one.
Straight up to the latest. That's great.
Yeah. So, and in fact, there is a certain parallel with Star Wars in the sense that this sense of ownership from the fans really comes is the same with James Bond, where people take and I think it's a compliment to how much a certain idea or a certain character means so much to people,
right?
So much part of their life growing up, and I think it's very interesting that normally within these franchises that people really love part of, they're things that they saw when they were very young, and they're very fixed points,
right?
Yeah, and they're very fixed ideas and very fixed emotions that they get from them. And so when something comes along that changes that fixed idea that they may have,
right,
that's the point at which people start to worry,
right?
Like the teenagers who are going, when you're growing up as a teenager, you've got all these hormones, and you have to go out into the world. You're no longer protected by a family, and you have to make your own way, and it's all completely uncertain,
right?
Because what you may do and your view of the world may be different to your own family, etc. And so you have to forge something new. It's very, very frightening, and which is the story of American Graffiti,
right?
And I think this ties into that idea of when people try to do something new with a franchise, that sort of normal fear kicks in.
Sure. Yep.
Until it actually appears, and then you start to try and process what's going on.
Yeah, and I think the sequel trilogy has been faced with that, certainly. That, and again, it's to your point. It's anything that, if you were to, I don't know, if somebody tried to redo the recipe of my mother's apple pie, and it wouldn't be the same, and I'd find fault with it before I found greatness with it sometimes.
But what happens if you cooked it, right? And then you found maybe there are these other apples that you really like,
right?
That you'd like to put in instead of her apples, yeah,
right?
And and you put it in, and you think, oh, gosh, that's really good. And when I put that cinnamon in, right, that was like It was delish.
Right.
So the thing is that each generation has their own twist on it, and
Right.
in fact, in the same way that George took Flash Gordon, Edgar Rice Burroughs, and Fellini's Satyricon, and he took Good, Bad, and the Ugly, and he took 2001, and he took Silent Running,
Right.
and all of these things, Joseph Campbell, and he took them all and he made his own recipe with those, yeah?
Yep.
In order to present to people. And now it's up to another generation, you know, to take what George has, you know, all the good bits that George brought to it,
Right.
and to create their own recipes, you know. And I think that, you know, in the same way that in the prequel trilogy, we didn't have Han, we didn't have Leo, we didn't have Luke, we had all these other characters, and those characters generated a new generation of fans. Yeah, just in the same way that the Clone Wars generated a new series of fans. Just like if you look at Doctor Who, and at Star Trek, each time something new comes out, right? Some people, you know, rebel against it,
right?
You know, but there's a whole group of other people saying, "No, I love that. I grew up with that."
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we all, you know, we all have something that we can bring, something creative that we can bring to the next thing. And I think that's just the natural way of it.
Yep. Yeah, it's that sort of discomfort from growth, I think, in a way, right?
Yeah,
so it's
exactly.
it's 100%
growing pains, I think it's called.
Growing pains, exactly. So so is there a series of films or a film or a genre that you would love that you haven't had a chance to dig into yet, that you would sort of put as your next favorite kind of project to get into?
Well, look behind me.
You've got a bit of you've got some things back there.
Yeah. I mean, there's like everything. I mean, I love so much. There's nothing like in specific. I mean, I'm working on. Oh gosh, it's like I just today. I'm working on a book. There's an artist called John Burns. I'm working on a book with him at the moment. Do that, self-published. I'm working on some comic strip stuff. I'm working on other film stuff that I can't talk about. But there's an author called Gerald Kirsch who has anything, nothing to hand, but he did Night in the City, the film Noir was based on one of his novels. So I'll be reprinting his books in special editions. So, you know, I've been researching him for 20, 30 years. So
that's great.
So the thing is, I've got many other things that I'm working on, but some things I can't talk about. But I've had, but funnily enough, there have been lots of projects that I've put forward that never quite made it. And that's always the way with these things. That,
right.
What happens is that, for instance, with James Bond, that was originally 20 years ago. You know, we thought about making that book, but it didn't happen until 2012.
Right.
The Star Wars originally before, but not until more recently. So who knows what may happen.
Well, you have a request from me and one of my patrons named Nick you could do an Indiana Jones book. We would love to see that.
I've already pitched that. I've already pitched that.
All right. Well,
I would love to do it. And I did have a look at some of the Indiana Jones archives.
I'm sure.
Couldn't help but, you know, see the Ark of the Covenant and stuff like this. You know.
I can't even imagine. I was very lucky in that I did get to visit the ranch once, and it was before its current form. And at the time, there was only one little alcove right near the main staircase that had film props. And the one of all the film props that were there, the one that sticks with me is the idol from Indiana Jones, from Raiders of the Lost Ark. And the funny thing is, it's just basically a beat up piece of wood that was painted gold. And it's it was just great to see it. Like, and I can only imagine going into the archives and seeing all of those things in their various forms must have been just mind blowing. So.
Yeah, I mean, I remember going around and there was these like little wooden X-Wings.
Yeah.
And I thought, God, what are they? And then, of course, today being the anniversary of a certain holiday special.
Yes, this is true.
Right, they are the actual the wooden X-Wings from the holiday.
Oh my
special.
gosh.
I am absolutely sure they are. So I mean, but yes, you do. There are amazing things in there that you think that can't be it, but they are.
But they are. Well, Paul, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I really appreciate it. Tell people where they can keep up with you online.
Oh, well, I tweet at Kirsch, KERSHATD. That's because of Gerald Kirsch. And I tweet daily about Star Wars.
Yes.
Or about other things occasionally.
Always great, like little on this day kind of things. And just really, really a fun follow. But Paul, this was great. Thank you so much. I hope to have you on again sometime. Maybe when that Indiana Jones book comes out, or maybe you'll do the sequel trilogy. Who knows?
Who knows? Perhaps in 10 years.
Right. Well, I'll be here. So, well,
right.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much.
Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Around the Galaxy. Thank you so much to Mr. Duncan, and thank you for listening. If you had fun, please like, subscribe, share, rate, and review it. Also, make sure to follow us on all your social media channels at ATGcast. Hey, and you can follow me at RealATG3. Yeah, I'm on Twitter. That's what I'm doing. That's how I'm getting in touch with the kids today. Anyway, this show has been copyright 2021 Pete in the Seat Studios. All of our music comes from the band Silver Colored Knob that you can find on, Spotify and Apple Music, wherever you get that stuff. Anyway, hey, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week on Around the Galaxy.